Ever wondered how information traversed across kingdoms in medieval times? Naturally, today we possess smartphones and instant messaging. But in that era, disseminating news was an art form, a disorganized, intricate, and occasionally comical endeavor. To begin with, town criers weren't merely individuals who enjoyed shouting, though that likely aided in securing the job. They were officially appointed news disseminators required to possess three fundamental attributes: a voice capable of rousing an entire town, a memory superior to your grandmother's capacity for recalling every embarrassing moment of your life, and here's the amusing part, the ability to sprint rapidly if the news they delivered was unwelcome. These medieval news announcers would commence their broadcasts with "Oye, oyes," which essentially meant, "Hey, listen up," although on occasion it probably meant stop haggling over that cabbage and pay attention. They were like human notification alerts, impossible to mute or scroll past. But the situation became particularly interesting regarding the crier's obligation to be completely truthful in their news delivery. Spreading false information wasn't just frowned upon, it could lead to dismissal or worse. One unfortunate town crier in 1316 was apprehended fabricating stories about grain prices to inflate the market. Suffice it to say, his subsequent career change was rather abrupt and involved being pelted with a considerable quantity of rotten vegetables. Now, if the town crier represented medieval Twitter, then taverns were unquestionably the medieval equivalent of Facebook, places where opinions flowed freely, whether you wanted to hear them or not. These establishments were not solely for drinking, though that certainly expedited the spread of news, if not its accuracy. They served as information hubs where merchants, travelers, and locals mingled in a vibrant mix of stories, rumors, and the occasional physical altercation over whose version of events was most accurate. Imagine a merchant entering a tavern after a long journey, having traveled from 3 kingdoms away and possessing news of a dragon sighting. By the time he finishes his first ale, the dragon has grown 3 heads. By his second ale, it is reportedly breathing rainbow fire. And by the third ale, somehow the dragon is now a candidate for local office with promising tax reforms. That's how news could transform within medieval taverns. Yet taverns fulfilled a crucial function beyond merely serving as medieval social networks. They were neutral spaces where individuals from all walks of life could gather and exchange information. A farmer might find himself seated beside a nobleman's servant and learn about impending changes in taxation. Recent archaeological findings at the site of the White Hart Inn in London have uncovered hundreds of tokens and markers used by medieval patrons to track their drinking debts. More intriguingly, researchers discovered scratch messages on the walls dating back to the 14th century, ranging from crude jokes to warnings about dishonest merchants. This proves that medieval people were just as inclined to leave reviews as we are today. The fascinating aspect of this system was its surprising effectiveness. In one documented case from 1348, news of a major battle in northern England reached London through tavern networks before the official royal messengers arrived. Although, to be fair, the story had evolved from the army won a significant victory to the king single-handedly wrestled 3 Scottish warriors while juggling sheep. Hey, nobody's perfect. One of the most enjoyable aspects of tavern news was its interactive nature. Unlike today, where we often merely skim headlines, medieval individuals would engage in debates, arguments, and embellish every story with their own interpretations. It was like a live comment section, but with more ale and fewer trolls. Taverns even developed their own informal verification system. Individuals known for disseminating reliable information often received complimentary drinks as a reward. Conversely, if caught fabricating stories, one might face a ban from every tavern in town, a fate worse than death for some medieval socialites. There is a recorded instance from 1382 of a man in York being banned from 12 different taverns for spreading malicious falsehoods about the mayor's daughter and a traveling circus performer. Now that's what I call medieval fact-checking. Some taverns became so well known for their news sharing that they acquired special nicknames. The actual ye olde trip to Jerusalem and Nottingham, which still exists, was purportedly a key stop for crusaders en route to the Holy Land. Just imagine the stories those walls could tell. Though after 8 centuries of spilled ale, they might be a bit tipsy themselves. Speaking of places where news spread rapidly, while taverns served as unofficial channels of medieval communication, Another institution played an even more vital role in keeping everyone informed: the church. Now, you might think prayer and news dissemination are incompatible, but let me tell you how the Sunday service essentially functioned as the medieval equivalent of a news broadcast. While tavern patrons were exchanging news over their third ale, a more structured form of communication was occurring every Sunday morning. Attending church wasn't solely about spiritual matters. It was your weekly subscription to the medieval news network. And believe me, unsubscribing wasn't an option. The local church was effectively the CNN of medieval times, sans the anchors and elaborate graphics. Every Sunday, between prayers and hymns, the priest would share the latest updates on everything happening in the kingdom. Unlike our modern news channels, you couldn't change the station during the less interesting segments. Here's a fun fact. Records from the 13th century show that some priests were actually given additional payment to announce specific news items. It was like medieval sponsored content, but instead of promoting slimming teas, they were announcing things like Lord Geoffrey's new tax on chickens or Lady Margaret's search for her missing prize cow. And yes, she was still offering a reward. The church service was divided into two parts: the spiritual content and what they termed the banns, which were essentially medieval public announcements. Getting married? This had to be announced in church for 3 consecutive Sundays. It was like posting your engagement online, but everyone had to sit through it, and your great aunt couldn't simply click like and move on. According to preserved church records from Winchester Cathedral, one particularly lengthy service in 1342 included announcements about 2 upcoming marriages, a new tax on wool, 3 missing sheep, all belonging to the same unfortunate farmer, a royal proclamation about beer length regulations, yes, that was a real thing, and a reminder that dancing during Lent was still strongly discouraged. The service reportedly lasted 4 hours. No wonder they installed kneelers in the pews. Priests wielded considerable power over the flow of information. They acted as medieval moderators, deciding which news was important enough to share during services. Some priests took this responsibility very seriously, while others, well, let's just say some, seemed more interested in announcing which tavern had the best ale that week. But it wasn't all local gossip and missing livestock reports. Churches were also where people learned about major events impacting their lives: wars, peace treaties, new laws, and even weather predictions. Though these were about as reliable as your current weather app, were all announced during services. One church record from 1356 shows a priest announcing both a royal wedding and a plague outbreak in the same service. Talk about mood swings. Churches even had their own version of breaking news. If something truly significant occurred, they would ring the church bells in specific patterns. Different rings conveyed different messages. One pattern meant, "We're under attack." Another meant, "They're really serious about attacking." And 3 fires usually meant, "Where is our army? We could really use an army right now." The priests themselves often became medieval influencers. They knew everything about everyone: who was getting married, who was arguing with their neighbors, who wasn't paying their taxes. That information came directly from the confession booth. One priest in York became so renowned for his detailed announcements that people from neighboring parishes would attend his services just to catch the latest gossip. Sometimes the line between religious ceremony and news bulletin became amusingly blurred. There's a recorded incident from 1389 where a priest accidentally mixed up his sermon notes with the weekly announcements and ended up delivering a passionate sermon about the importance of finding whoever stole William the baker's favorite bread paddle. The congregation reportedly found it so moving that the paddle was returned the next day. Of course, not everyone was enthusiastic about this system. Records show numerous complaints about priests who became overly zealous in their role as news anchors. One letter from 1367 grumbles about a priest who spent more time announcing local cheese market prices than discussing scripture. The bishop's response, preserved in church records, essentially amounted to, "As long as they're attending church, let them discuss cheese." The church also served as a medieval lost and found. Records from St. Peter's Church in Wessex show a hilarious list of items announced as lost during services, including a slightly used sword, a prayer book with suspicious wine stains, and most mysteriously, a chicken that answers to the name of Gregory. While priests were busy delivering news from the pulpit, another group of religious individuals meticulously documented everything in their quiet monasteries. Monks were creating the medieval equivalent of Wikipedia, and indeed, they had some compelling stories to tell. Those quiet individuals in brown robes weren't just dedicating their days to prayer. Medieval monks were essentially operating around-the-clock information service, complete with the world's most expensive handwritten books and occasionally some rather juicy gossip about who did what at the last royal banquet. Monasteries across Europe functioned like a vast medieval database. Each one housed a scriptorium, a formal term for the room where monks wrote, and they documented everything with meticulous detail. One monastery in northern France filled 127 books in a single year, exceeding the content output of most contemporary online creators. And they accomplished all of this using quill pens and candlelight. These individuals didn't merely transcribe the Bible, they chronicled everything from weather patterns to local events. These monasteries possessed better fact-checking capabilities than most modern social media platforms. Before something was included in the official chronicles, it had to be verified by multiple sources. A record from Canterbury shows monks dispatching letters to 3 different monasteries simply to confirm the veracity of a reported dragon sighting. Spoiler alert, it turned out to be just a very large, ill-tempered goose. Some monasteries developed specializations in different types of information. The monks at Durham were renowned for their political reporting, while the community at Glastonbury was apparently the medieval equivalent of a celebrity gossip site, specializing in royal scandals. An actual entry from 1326 reads, "The king's cousin was seen dancing inappropriately at a feast. We pray for his soul and also for more details about what kind of dancing it was." However, being a medieval chronicler wasn't all amusement and gossip. These monks faced significant occupational hazards. The ink they used was toxic, paper cuts were a constant occurrence, and spending hours hunched over a desk resulted in severe backaches. One monk wrote in the margin, "If anyone wants to know what a living hell feels like, try copying a book." Medieval workplace complaints. Anyone? Statistics from surviving manuscripts indicate that an average monk could copy approximately 2 to 3 pages per day. This means a single book could take months to complete. It's no wonder they occasionally seemed a bit unhinged. There are actual drawings in the margins of medieval manuscripts depicting knights battling snails, rabbits hunting humans, and what appears to be a breakdancing bishop. The monks also developed their own kind of medieval coded language. If they truly wanted to criticize someone but couldn't do so officially, they would deliberately insert mistakes into the text that other monks would understand. One chronicle describing a particularly unpopular nobleman suddenly begins spelling his name incorrectly in increasingly creative ways. My personal favorite, Lord Geoffrey becoming Lord Goofy by the end of the manuscript. These monasteries also served as medieval hotels for travelers, which meant monks gathered news from all over. A fascinating discovery in 1998 revealed that some monasteries even had underground tunnels connecting them to nearby taverns. Officially, these were for emergency supplies. Right, brothers, whatever you say. It's perhaps no surprise that some later nighttime chronicles become a bit more imaginative in their reporting. Recent analysis of monastery records shows just how detailed their information network was. One monastery in Yorkshire maintained a visitor's log that recorded not only names, but also snippets of conversations, rumors, and even jokes shared by travelers. They also kept what they called a book of dubious tales, basically a medieval version of a fact-checking ledger, tracking which traveling storytellers were reliable and which ones were prone to embellishing their tales with dragons and giants. While these holy scribes diligently documented history, one quill stroke at a time, another group of individuals was disseminating news across the medieval world. The traveling merchants. Unlike our monastic friends who remain stationary, these individuals carried their stories and their goods on the road. Medieval merchants weren't just trading spices and silk. They were peddling the most valuable commodity of all, information. These mobile news outlets covered more ground than a contemporary delivery driver, albeit with greater danger and considerably worse hygiene. Records from 1347 show an average merchant traveled about 20 to 25 miles per day, meaning news could cover roughly 150 miles per week, assuming the merchant wasn't robbed, lost, or diverted by a particularly inviting tavern along the way. One particularly renowned merchant, Thomas of Walsingham, kept a diary that has survived to this day. His entries are invaluable. Day 37, sold 3 barrels of wine, told everyone about the Duke's new hat. Day 38, Nobody cared about the wine, but everyone wanted to know more about the hat. Day 39. Sold all the wine by claiming it was the same type the Duke spilled on said hat. These individuals understood their real business, and it wasn't solely the merchandise. The most astute merchants realized that valuable gossip could boost their sales. Oh, this silk is just like what the Queen wore when she supposedly slapped the French ambassador. Want to hear that story? Perhaps while admiring these fine fabrics? Marketing hasn't changed much in 700 years, has it? However, there's an important point about merchant news. Accuracy wasn't always paramount. It was like a medieval game of telephone stretched across entire kingdoms. A story that began in Paris with the king bought a new horse might arrive in London as the king transformed into a horse after a witch cursed him. Archaeological records from trading posts reveal how stories evolved. One logbook from 1356 tracks the same piece of news through different merchants, each version becoming progressively more dramatic. Some merchants specialized in specific types of news. Spice traders were known for political gossip, likely because they dealt with noble households, while cloth merchants were the go-to source for fashion mishaps and social scandals. One cloth merchant's records from 1382 include detailed descriptions of 7 different noble ladies wearing the same dress to the same tournament, the medieval equivalent of a fashion faux pas website. The most successful merchants maintained extensive networks. They had regular meeting points where they would exchange information with other traders, creating a sort of medieval newswire service. A trading post register from York shows merchants scheduling their routes to meet up and swap stories. One entry reads, "Meeting point, the Old Oak. Time, sunset. Bring news about the bishop's missing sheep and that fancy cheese from France." Speaking of trading posts, these locations were like medieval news agencies. One surviving guest book from a trading post in Bristol records comments like, "John's prices are high, but his stories about the Scottish court are worth it. And don't believe a word Thomas says about dragons, but his news about grain prices is solid." Medieval Yelp reviews, anyone? Merchants even developed their own coded language and signals. A red flag displayed outside a trading post meant new political news was available, while a blue one indicated social gossip for sale. Some clever merchants manipulated these signals to generate interest. One individual in Canterbury was caught displaying all his colored flags simultaneously to create a bidding war for his stories. Local authorities made him sell his exclusive news at half price for a month as punishment. However, it wasn't solely gossip and games. Merchants played a vital role in disseminating important news. During the Black Death, it was merchants who first brought warnings about the plague's spread, although some of them admittedly exploited this information to sell magical plague-preventing spices at inflated prices. Medieval disaster capitalism at its finest. Merchant records from 1375 indicate that some traders could earn more from selling information than from selling goods. One particularly successful merchant in London listed his profits as 40% from silk, 60% from knowing which silk the princess hates. These individuals recognized that information was a commodity long before the age of data brokers and social media influencers. Not everyone appreciated these traveling news vendors, however. A royal decree from 1364 complained about merchants spreading ridiculous tales and improbable stories. The amusing part? The same king later employed these merchants as spies because they were so adept at gathering intelligence. Talk about a career upgrade, from selling textiles to serving in royal intelligence. As night fell and the merchants packed away their goods and their stories, another group of entertainers often took center stage. Bards and minstrels traversed from town to town, armed with only their instruments and an extraordinary memory for gossip set to music. They would take the latest news, everything from royal scandals to local drama, and weave it into songs that would stick in people's minds. Medieval records show some of these songs were so catchy that priests complained about people humming them during church services. One particularly famous song from 1352 about a noble's wife running away with a shepherd became such a hit that the noble attempted to ban it. Spoiler alert, that only increased its popularity. The song spread across England faster than the noble's embarrassment, with versions still being sung 200 years later. The noble's descendant actually tried to ban it again in 1548, which simply sparked a whole new wave of performances. Performers knew how to engage their audiences. Court records from 1378 describe a minstrel who specialized in turning local scandals into humorous songs. However, he always ensured he had two versions prepared, one for occasions when the subject of the song was present and another for when they were absent. That's some medieval damage control right there. But these performers weren't just medieval tabloid writers with lutes. They played a crucial role in disseminating important news as well. Statistics from medieval court records highlight the influence of these performers. In 1 year, a popular performer could visit up to 100 different towns, performing for anywhere between 50 and 500 people at each stop. That's more effective than most medieval town criers, who were limited to addressing the same local crowd daily. One particularly successful performer, known as William the Witty, covered so much ground that people joked he must have a twin brother. It turned out he did, and they were operating a medieval entertainment empire. Some performers even developed specialties. The tragic news singers always dressed in dark colors and carried mournful-looking instruments. Political news performers wore different colored ribbons to subtly indicate their allegiances. And then there were the local gossip specialists who probably needed to be exceptionally adept at making a hasty retreat after their performances. A fascinating entry in a town ledger from 1365 illustrates how one clever performer earned extra income. He would sing the first half of a compelling news song, then pass his hat around before finishing the story. Medieval cliffhangers. They certainly knew how to keep their audience captivated. The songs themselves served as medieval history books set to music. One researcher discovered that a series of songs about the 100 Years' War contained more accurate battle details than some official chronicles, although they did tend to exaggerate the number of dragons involved in each battle. One popular version claimed that the Battle of Agincourt was won with the assistance of a friendly dragon who coincidentally sneezed fire at the opportune moment. These performers even had their own version of chart-topping hits. Popular songs would spread from town to town, with each performer adding their own interpretation. By the time a song had traveled 100 miles, it might have gained 3 verses, lost 2, and somehow acquired a dancing bear in the storyline. Medieval remix culture was wild. However, being a traveling performer wasn't all fame and fortune. They faced unique occupational hazards. One performer's diary from 1392 lists his weekly expenses. New strings for lute, 2 pennies. Bribes to avoid jail after that song about the mayor, 5 shillings. Worth it for the applause. Another entry reads, lost voice singing about the king's new taxes. Crowd thought my croaking was a creative political statement. Made double the money. While these musical newscasters were busy transforming gossip into popular hits, another group took a more formal approach to disseminating information. The medieval postal service was about to provide these performers with significant competition, albeit with considerably less singing and a lot more horses. Before contemporary courier services and priority shipping, medieval kings maintained their own express delivery system. What began as an urgent need for message delivery evolved into a network of messengers rapidly traversing kingdoms with letters, packages, and likely more than a few royal complaints about neighboring rulers. In 1350, a skilled messenger could deliver a letter from London to York, a distance of about 200 miles in just 4 days. Certainly slower than today's instant messaging, but far quicker than walking, especially when roads were essentially muddy tracks with aspirations of being highways. The Royal Messenger Service meticulously documented their deliveries, and some of these records have survived. One account book from 1374 lists messenger expenses, including new horse, previous one got stuck in a bog, 3 pairs of boots worn through, compensation for being chased by wolves, and 1 new hat, old ones stolen by highway robbers who apparently had fashion sense. Speed wasn't solely dependent on having fast horses. These messengers had special privileges. They could demand fresh horses at royal posts, dislodge people from inns to secure lodging. Royal seal is now slightly wet. It's impressive how they developed a medieval version of priority mail. Regular messages were carried by horse, urgent ones by relay riders who passed the message like a medieval baton. Drop everything and run messages went by carrier pigeon, though according to a complaint from 1392, some pigeons were more interested in finding food than delivering mail. One frustrated messenger wrote, "Pigeon delivered message 2 days late. Found it nesting in the castle kitchen. Suspect bribes of breadcrumbs involved." Statistics from royal records show the scale of this operation. In 1360, The English Royal Messenger Service employed over 200 full-time riders and maintained staging posts every 20 to 30 miles along major roads. At each post, they kept fresh horses, spare boots, and likely a considerable supply of bandages for saddle sores. The annual budget for the messenger service exceeded the yearly income of some small towns. However, considering these individuals were transporting medieval state secrets, the expense was likely justified. But the messenger's role wasn't just about transportation. Medieval messengers also had to be part diplomat, part actor, and part escape artist. They often had to memorize messages in case they were robbed. One messenger famously delivered his message while disguised as an itinerant juggler. His account simply states, "Juggling skills are poor, drop balls on Duke's foot, message delivered, never juggling again." Royal messengers even developed their own secret codes. Different colored wax seals indicated varying levels of urgency. A red seal with gold flecks meant, "Wake up the king now," while a plain brown seal meant, "Whenever you get around to it." One messenger faced trouble for using a fake urgent seal merely to receive better service at inns. His punishment? He had to deliver all his messages on foot for a month. The job came with some unique benefits. Messengers could claim free food and lodging anywhere by displaying the royal seal. Some clever individuals apparently made detours specifically to visit inns with good reputations. A stern note from 1389 cautioned messengers that the fastest route between 2 points was not necessarily the one with the most taverns. Another note added, "Stop reviewing inns. You're messengers, not food critics." But being a medieval mail carrier wasn't all fun and free meals. These individuals faced real dangers. One surviving report lists hazards, including bandits, wolves, angry peasants, suspicious foreign guards, and occasional dragons. Likely just large lizards, but better safe than sorry. The report continues, detailing recommended survival strategies, including, when confronted by bandits, remind them that stealing royal mail is punishable by death. If that fails, run in a zigzag pattern. Most bandits are too lazy to follow. The postal system even had its own method of delivery confirmation. Recipients were required to sign for important messages, though some of these signatures are quite amusing. One nobleman, apparently unable to write, simply drew a picture of a duck. This became his official signature thereafter, proving that even medieval bureaucracy possessed a sense of humor. Another lord's signature was described as possibly a horse, maybe a cloud, definitely not legible. While these official messengers were galloping across the countryside with their important letters and suspicious-looking seals, another group was gathering information in a much more clandestine manner. Medieval spies and diplomats were about to demonstrate how to truly keep secrets, or at least attempt to. The medieval world had its own version of secret agents, albeit with less stylish attire and no sophisticated gadgets. Instead of high-tech spy gear, these medieval intelligence agents relied on wit, charm, and a remarkable ability to appear interested in exceptionally boring dinner conversations. Records from the English royal court indicate that by 1375, every major European kingdom had at least a dozen official observers in rival courts. Medieval speak for spies who were rather inept at maintaining their cover. One French spy's expense report included new hat to look more English and English language lessons. An additional note added, apparently saying pip pip repeatedly does not make one sound English. The most successful spies were not the shadowy figures lurking in corners. They were the unassuming officials whom no one paid attention to. Court documents reveal that one of England's most effective spies was an individual whose job was to count sheep for tax purposes. No one suspected him because everyone fell asleep whenever he began discussing sheep counting methods. His reports were concealed within endless scrolls detailing wool production trends. Medieval spy training was surprisingly thorough. A training manual from 1382 included lessons on how to feign intoxication while actually listening, how to appear foolish while being shrewd, and plausible excuses for being found in the wrong castle corridor. The top excuse? I was looking for the bathroom. Apparently, some things remain consistent. The manual also advises, if caught in royal chambers, pretend to be sleepwalking. Warning, this excuse is effective only once per castle. Diplomatic missions provided perfect cover for espionage. One ambassador's diary from 1394 reads, Monday discussed peace treaty, Tuesday attended feast, Wednesday counted enemy troops while pretending to admire castle walls. Thursday got caught counting, claimed I was really into architecture. Now I must attend a 3-hour lecture on flying buttresses. Friday, actually becoming interested in architecture. This may be a problem. Diplomats developed a sophisticated system of concealed messages within their official correspondence. A letter might outwardly discuss trade agreements, but the true message was conveyed through elements like the spacing between words or tiny marks on specific letters. Medieval spy budgets were surprisingly substantial. Royal accounts from 1388 showed that England spent more on foreign intelligence than on royal entertainment. One spy's expense report lists 50 gold coins for bribing guards, 20 silver pieces for tavern gossip, 5 copper pennies for actual spying work, 2 gold coins for hangover cures. Clearly, medieval espionage involved a significant amount of drinking. But being a medieval spy wasn't all secret messages and extravagant parties. These individuals faced real dangers. One spy's last report simply states, "Cover blown. If you're reading this, I'm probably in a dungeon. Please feed my cat. P.S. The orange one is not actually my cat, but keeps showing up anyway. Don't feed that one. It's probably a spy too." Diplomatic immunity didn't always offer sufficient protection. One ambassador's report complains, "Host kingdom claims diplomatic immunity doesn't cover being caught in the royal library at midnight." Strongly disagree. Currently writing this from a surprisingly comfortable prison cell. Having convinced guards I was just really enthusiastic about late-night reading. Now teaching them to read may have accidentally started the first prison education program. Some spies were so inept at operating covertly that they became well-known. A note from 1391 mentions that spy from Bavaria, who everyone knows is a spy, but we pretend not to notice because he's really good at juggling. Another record describes a spy so obvious that people began asking him for updates on his own espionage activities. He eventually gave up and became a town crier. Competition between rival spy networks became quite intense. One kingdom's spies spent 3 months spreading rumors that their king had invented a secret weapon, simply to observe rival spies wasting time trying to locate it. The weapon turned out to be a new type of cheese grater. The rival kingdom's response, they sent the cheese grater spy network a very nice cheese basket with a note saying, "Well played." This initiated a tradition of spy networks exchanging increasingly elaborate cheese-based gifts. While these medieval secret agents were diligently exchanging coded messages and attempting to remain undetected, another system of communication was developing, one that required neither spies nor messengers, but merely a strong voice in a strategically located tall hill. Medieval warning systems were poised to revolutionize the dissemination of news at remarkable speed. When seconds were critical and waiting for a messenger to finish their meal was not an option. Medieval kingdoms turned to faster methods, fire signals and war drums. It was like texting, but involving more smoke and considerably more noise. Archaeological evidence reveals that by 1300, England had over 150 official signal stations. Each station stood ready to ignite faster than a teenager's phone screen when their crush texts back. These beacons could transmit a message from London to York, approximately 200 miles in under an hour. Quite impressive for a network of individuals essentially playing with fire. The signal system operated on a simple principle: see fire, light fire, repeat. However, human nature complicated things. Different types of fires conveyed different messages. One fire meant we're under attack. 2 fires meant they're really serious about attacking. And 3 fires usually meant, where is our army? We could really use an army right now. Training records from 1362 highlight the stringent requirements for beacon operators. They needed impeccable eyesight, the ability to stay awake during night shifts, more challenging than it sounds when staring at an empty hill for hours. And most importantly, the prudence not to light the beacon simply upon seeing a farmer burning leaves. One operator was reportedly fired for triggering a kingdom-wide panic over what proved to be someone's particularly smoky barbecue. War drums added another layer to this medieval alert system. Different drum patterns conveyed different messages, akin to medieval Morse code. A discovered drum manual from 1384 lists patterns for everything from enemy approaching to forgot lunch, send sandwiches. The manual specifically warned against improvising new rhythms during battle, regardless of how catchy they might be. These systems had contingency plans for every scenario. If fog obscured fire signals, they used horns. If wind made horns ineffective, they used runners. And if all else failed, they resorted to what one record terms the shout really loud and hope someone hears you protocol. Surprisingly, this last method proved effective more often than one might expect. However, medieval warning systems were not without flaws. One amusing report from 1379 details a chain reaction of false alarms triggered by a group of enthusiastic fireflies. 6 beacons were lit, 3 armies were mobilized, and 1 king was disturbed during his bath for nothing. The fireflies were reportedly quite pleased with themselves. The statistics are impressive, though. A well-maintained beacon system could transmit a basic message across 300 miles in under 2 hours, although sometimes the message became slightly garbled along the way. One record shows how a minor border raid escalated into a massive dragon invasion after passing through just 4 beacons. Medieval game of telephone, anyone? Weather was the biggest adversary for these systems. Rain, fog, and snow could render the entire network inoperable. One operator's log simply reads, "Day 15 of fog, may have forgotten what fire looks like. Bear attacked yesterday, couldn't see it coming. Bear equally confused by fog. We had tea." Coordinating these systems demanded incredible organization. Each beacon required at least 3 operators working in shifts, plus wood suppliers, maintenance workers, and likely someone to keep the operators from succumbing to boredom. One kingdom's annual budget shows they spent more on keeping their beacon operators entertained than they did on actual wood for the beacons. Different kingdoms developed their own unique signals. Scottish beacons employed different colored smokes, though the method for achieving this remains unclear. The Welsh utilized a combination of drums and exceptionally loud singing, and one small German duchy reportedly trained a flock of geese to honk in specific patterns, which worked perfectly until the geese decided to unionize and demand better working conditions. Just as everyone became adept at this fire and drums communication method, something emerged that would fundamentally alter the dissemination of news. A German individual named Gutenberg was about to inadvertently initiate a revolution in how news spread, one involving significantly less fire and considerably more paper. A German goldsmith named Johannes Gutenberg likely had no intention of completely upending the world of news. He was merely seeking a more efficient method of producing money, literally as he began by minting coins. Instead, he created something that would make medieval rulers wish they could return to the simpler times of manageable town criers and predictable carrier pigeons. Before Gutenberg's printing press in 1440, obtaining news on paper was akin to manually copying a friend's homework. Slow, laborious, and prone to errors. Monks spent years copying books by hand, likely developing both severe hand cramps and an impressive vocabulary of medieval expletives. The first printing press revolutionized everything faster than one could say, breaking news. Suddenly, information could be mass-produced. One printer in 1465 could produce more copies of a text in a week than a medieval scribe could complete in a year. The monks were probably quite relieved until they realized this meant they had to find alternative uses for their time. Early printers had no comprehension of the magnitude of their invention. They believed they would primarily print religious texts and perhaps some decorative calendars. Instead, they inadvertently created the world's first news industry. One printer's log from 1472 reads, "Printed 100 Bibles this month, also printed 500 pamphlets about local scandals. Guess which one sold out first?" By 1500, just 60 years after Gutenberg's first press, Europe had produced over 20 million printed books, more books than all European scribes had produced in the preceding 1,000 years. To be fair, the scribes probably required more coffee breaks. Writing by hand is exhausting. Not everyone was thrilled by this proliferation of information. Kings and nobles suddenly lost their ability to control who was disseminating news. An angry letter from one nobleman in 1478 complains, "These printing shops are worse than taverns. At least drunk people eventually fall asleep." Printed words never stop talking. The first newspapers began to appear, and they were quite sensational. One from 1493 reported on a 2-headed calf, a shower of fish, likely just a flood near a fish market, and what it claimed was a dragon sighting, definitely a large lizard that got into someone's wine cellar. In 1495, news of a political scandal in Rome reached London in printed form before the official messenger carrying the same information arrived. The messenger was reportedly quite annoyed, especially as the printed version included funnier jokes about the scandal than his official report. The printing press even altered how people argued. Instead of merely shouting at each other in taverns, they could now compose angry pamphlets about one another. One printer's records show a series of increasingly heated pamphlets exchanged between two scholars, debating whether cats could understand Latin. The argument reportedly spanned 3 years and consumed more paper than a complete Bible. Kings attempted to regulate this new technology through licensing laws and censorship, but trying to control printing was akin to attempting to catch rain with a fork, technically possible, but largely futile. For every officially sanctioned printer, there were 3 unofficial ones operating from basements and barns. One raid in 1489 uncovered a complete printing operation hidden in a chicken coop. The chickens apparently served as excellent lookouts. This revolution in news dissemination would ultimately lead to things we now take completely for granted, such as the ability to read about your neighbor's breakfast without actually having to engage in conversation with them. Progress, right? And that is how medieval people managed to spread news without a single smartphone or social media account. Although sometimes you have to wonder if our modern methods are truly that much more reliable than a town crier with a strong voice and good running shoes.